4. I was sitting in my van on Fraserburgh High Street, skipping through my music for something I wasn't sick of, checking the time far too often, telling myself it wasn't cold enough to start the engine, even though my hands were wooden and I knew they'd sting later when they warmed through again. I braced my feet as the van rocked in the biting wind. Straight off the North Sea it was. Straight from the Baltic, Big Gary always said, no matter how many times I told him to look at a map. I found myself smiling at the memory and then felt a jolt, one that was growing familiar, as reality hit me. He was 2 people in my mind now, the people smuggler that I was going to bring down, and the man in my memory with his sayings and his ways. A yawn racked me and, when it passed, left me shivering. "Oh, give it up, Tash," I said. I often spoke to myself, usually in just this scornful cajoling tone, undercutting whatever I'd decided, convincing myself I was wrong about some little thing or other. Not the big thing, funnily enough. I was dead sure about that. I put my foot on the clutch and turned the key, trying not to hear the struggle of the engine coming to life from a cold start. 2 women, who'd just left the pub together, turned round and gave the van a wary look. My interview was set for midnight, and I'd even remembered to pretend to find that strange. "Don't worry," the guy had said when I'd queried it, laughing through his nose. "That's normal in this line of work. The switch from back to night shift's the only dead time in the day. We always do interviews then. Sides, from out else it flushes out the time wasters, if you get my drift." "Right," I had said. "Yes, I suppose so. If someone won't stop up till all hours to get the job, they won't stop up till all hours to do it." "That's about the size of it," the guy had said, sounding disappointed I'd worked it out and stolen away the chance for him to explain it to me. "Only, it's not a job. You did know that, right? It's a partnership." I checked my watch again. If I drove slowly and went through the streets instead of out to the bypass, I'd be in nice time. Meaning 10 minutes early. 5 minutes to brush my hair and gather my nerve. 5 minutes ahead, knocking on the door. Perfect. I slowed in case the 2 women wanted to cross the road and get out of the wind, but they were standing in the pool of yellow from the lamp post, hugging each other. They were local, probably, born and bred in this merciless granite town, well used to that freezing gale off the North Sea. They might be daughters of trawlermen, granddaughters of gutting women, totally impervious. Or maybe it was a date, and the cold didn't matter. They were dressed too different to be friends on a night out. One, as plain as pudding in warm boots and a quilted coat, and one in high heels with a sparkly scarf. And they were made too different to be sisters. A blind date, I reckoned. Was a kissless hug a bad end to a blind date, or a good sign for the next one? I wouldn't know. I'd never had to go online for a fella, or wait for one of my pals to press gang someone. Not that I'm pretty. Baz won that lottery. A perfect mix of Dad's Scottish thing of black hair, black brows, black lashes, and pale blue eyes, and Mum's English thing of golden skin and rosy cheeks like a peach. Baz was a blue-eyed peach, and everyone he met believed that all the good stuff went deeper than his dimples. I got Big Gary's white skin and solid middle, little Lynn's sharp nose and cankles, but they'd made me wear braces and do ballet, so I had straight teeth and an even straighter back, and I knew men looked. I could feel their eyes on me. There's more humiliating things than being chosen for your looks anyway. My family was known in Grangemouth. Known to have money, that is. And money without class is the perfect mixture to snag the interest of absolutely everyone. At least it struck me that way. The Bowness Road poshos had been whisked away to boarding school at 12, but they came home for Christmas and hung around in their rugby shirts, assuming I'd be grateful for the attention. There was a pool at my house, heated, and a cinema room. Even as they laughed at how naff it was, they made sure to bring a pair of trunks and ask what films were on offer. The Kerse Road boys, Kerseholes, they called themselves. As down-to-earth as the Dodds and none of the cash. Well, they had a go-to. They knew my granny still lived in her 4 in a block on Wallace Street. They knew Big Gary Dodd had started where they still were, and they reckoned sidling up to me was one way to follow him all the way to where he was now. When I took the Saturday job in the front office, that was my dad over the back, no handouts for his girl. The boys, who looked up to him, came round like dogs to deer shit, hanging over the desk, even pretending to need packing boxes, pretending they didn't know they weren't free. So the girls who came round were nearly welcome, just as a contrast, even though I knew girls weren't my cup of tea. I didn't understand what vibe I was sending out. Maybe no more than how I treated the boys, poshos and yobbos, with the same disdain, and so the girls reckoned they might as well have a go. I'd found friends that way, but no lovers. I was glad of it now, no strings, no ties. It made it that much easier to do what I was doing. What I was starting to do, with this first step, easing in at Icarus Overland, if I was really going to go through with my plan and not just call the cops on a burner, then throw it into the sea. But that would bring down an empire, destroy a life's work, collapse the coalface. I didn't want to do quite as much as that. I was well out into the suburbs now, the winter night not quite so bitter away from the sea, so my hands were a bit warmer and sat relaxed on the wheel, my foot steady on the pedal. I knew I was a good driver. How could I not be? But it still sometimes unsettled me to realise I had zoned out, following the sat-nav as if the voice had gone straight from my ears to my hands and missed my brain completely. Paying attention again, I thought suburbs was the wrong word for these streets of light industrial and remnants of retail, just the odd house stranded amongst the plumbing supplies, logistics software, and electronic components. Outskirts, that was the word I was after. BG had been born, the one van and a prefab, in the outskirts of Grangemouth, on a patch of weedy tarmac between the bonded store and a timber merchant, and every BG centre was still in the outskirts of somewhere. I was a connoisseur of burger vans and donut stands, from the years of working wherever I was needed. I knew which DIY stores sold crisps and Coke at the checkout, and which car dealerships couldn't care less who helped themselves to the coffee. I had given up asking my dad to put in snack machines. Costs to the bone, cash in the bank. That was Big Gary's way. I glimpsed the sign for Icarus Overland, an outsized plastic board hooked on the chain link at the far end of a cul-de-sac. Down-to-earth delivery, it said. Grudgingly, I admitted that was clever and wondered how much they'd had to cough up to a branding firm for it. Then I was swinging in at the open security gate and heading for the boxy little office to one side of the warehouse, swerving the men on the loading dock and the growling, idling vans, their exhausts still belching as they warmed for the night shift. They were half and half fleet and privates, thank God. If Icarus was maxed out and already letting drivers use their own vans, they wouldn't blink at me doing the same. And if I used my own van, I'd need much less checking. The office door was glass, and a harsh blue light shone out onto the tarmac. I could see someone stand up from behind a desk and come to meet me. Trouble. If he could tell my van wasn't one of the usuals, if he was that sharp, I might have to abandon this attempt and try again. Another name, another phone, another Gmail account. I'd been driving for hours and my shoulders slumped at the thought of it. But the man I'd seen moving was slouched in the doorway now, with his phone tucked into his neck as he lit a fag with a match he scraped on the harling. He wasn't even looking at me. I had slowed, parked, and jumped down before he turned my way. When he did, he gave me no more than a lazy once-over. I walked right up to the foot of the metal steps and gave him a smile I hoped was bright enough without being a challenge to him. "I'll have to go, doll," he said. Customer. Doll. He was a Glasgow man. I felt my breath pick up and wondered if I should turn and walk before he got a better look at me. I had come all this way up to Fraserburgh to get away from anyone who'd know Big Gary and might, at some function or other, have met me. Glasgow was far too close to home. But I managed to get a decent squint at the guy in the light while he finished up the goodbyes and stowed his phone back in its holster, and I was pretty sure I'd never seen him before. I tried to slow my breath again. He'd definitely never worked at BG anyway. I knew the face of every guy who'd ever passed through there. I'm not, I said, climbing 2 of the steps and then sticking my hand out. A customer. I'm here for an interview. I spoke to the day shift manager, I think. He lifted one eyebrow and turned his head to the side as if he was running through all the possibilities of a girl working for him. I pretended I hadn't noticed and climbed up another step. Nate Dewar. He rubbed his hand on the bum of his trousers before he shook mine. Jamie Morton, he said. Then, Nate? Oh, I said. I never thought. Short for Natalie, not Nathan. You were expecting a man, weren't you? 21st century, sweetheart, he said. No irony intended, I was sure. Come in and let's have a chat. That your van, is it? I was cheering inside, but I kept my voice calm as I answered. 3 years old, just past its first MOT, 0 excess, refrigeration unit already installed. Is it now? And I've got the inspection report for it. I've been driving 7 years. No points, and I don't drink. No use offering you a wee whiskey to keep out the cold then, eh? The floor of the office bounced as he crossed it, and the filing cabinets lined up against the back wall slammed against each other like cymbals. He threw himself into the big padded chair behind his desk and immediately put both feet up on top of the paperwork that littered the top. Just kidding, he said. But how about a cup of tea? I'm fine, I said. You go ahead. He had a fancy black carry-out cup beside his laptop, and he flipped the stopper and took a swig of it. Coffee and butter, he said. 1/2 litre a day. I've lost 2 stone, carb-free since last Christmas. Then he did that thing of nearly crossing his arms, but instead of threading his fingers through to rest his hand, he kept it behind his other arm to bunch both sets of biceps forward. Good for you, I said. To be honest, that's the only thing about a driving gig, that's putting me off. Trucker's butt. His eyes flicked to my hips and back up again. Here, I said. Here's my stuff. Application form, DBS, check, that report on the chill unit. I've got plenty experience for multi-drop, but only casual, seasonal. And what's got you interested in medical delivery? He said. Sick of handing people crap they don't need and know they shouldn't have bought, I said. I want to do something worthwhile. And why was it casual, seasonal? He said. What were you doing the rest of the time? Here, you weren't actually doing time, were you? Then he said, hey, to show he was joking. College, I said, bloody waste of money. What did you do? Film. This was no time for pride. I welcomed the pity, even the hoot of laughter, since it might get me in the door. And you don't mean plastics engineering, I'll bet, he said. I had been laughing along with him, and my smile didn't dim, but it took more work to keep it on my face as the thought that he was no fool struck me again. But what makes you want to be a driver at all? He said, when he'd recovered from his joke. Girl like you, no offence. You could be on a reception desk somewhere, bringing in punters. Drivers get better money, I said, then held up my crossed fingers. I hope. They do, Morton said. If they're willing to work hard and work quick. You decide if it's worth your while to make this profitable. It's completely up to you, though. Lost and late items, if you don't bother to keep up, well, that's going to cost you. Your choice. But I will say, you're joining a good team. We've got some of the best delivered rates in the whole of the country. I left a pause, as if I was mulling over his words. Do you all know each other then? The different companies? He hooked a look as if he didn't understand me. Otherwise, how do you know your rates are better? Morton sliced the glance away to one side. It might have been the side that people looked to when they were lying, but it might just as easily be the side where they searched for genuine information to retrieve it. I could never remember. Or is there a league table? That's it, Morton said. But it's complicated and confidential, management-level access only. He was a fool after all, I thought. There was no such thing, and if there was, it would be public. I puffed out a sigh and raised my eyebrows. Rather you than me, pal, I said. Film diploma, remember? He was smiling again. Have you got any questions yourself? He said. I nodded. It was part of the game to have questions. I knew that from sitting in on interviews at BG. Minimum wage and minimum perks, but everyone pretended that the drain clump of beer belly and bad breath trying to snag the job really just wanted flexible hours and the chance to use his own initiative. If any of them had ever asked what the overtime rate was and how the boss felt about hangover sickies, I'd have started him at a premium for honesty. I have got a few questions, as it happens, I said to Morton, and saw him crinkle up his eyes and lift one side of his mouth, in something that wasn't quite a smile. He'd be wondering what crap I'd managed to dredge up. I know I'd be delivering from the pharmaceutical suppliers. Sometimes Aberdeen RI, he cut in. But I'd be based here, right? Your tracer's based here. You've got your deposit for the tracer with you, I hope. Expensive bit of kit. And you'll be fueling up here, yes. Why? Are there showers? I said. Changing facilities? Just lockers, he said. You'll have to stand up with a flannel if you come straight from Zumba. I gave him the laugh he was waiting for. And the lockers? Are they just for the shift? Or can I iron a load of polos and leave them there for the week? Your locker's yours for the duration, Morton said. And then some. Bingo. My heart leapt, but I managed to frown and quirk my head as if I didn't understand. Worker privacy laws, he said. No such thing as a master key, unless we want our arses sued off us. Over the pond, you know, they spot test for drugs and booze, spot search every damn locker whenever they feel like it. Different story here. Folk have retired and left all their clubber, taken the only key with them, and here's me terrified to break the lock and bin it, in case he'd the bar pops up with an inventory. Bit mad, I said, cheering inside. The lockers at BG were always stuffed with leftover crap for months, while HR made all reasonable efforts to contact the ex-employee and shake the key out of him. I'd counted on it being the same at Icarus. I didn't know what I'd have done otherwise. Bit pointless, Morton said, nodding at his laptop. That's where everyone keeps their dirt these days, not wrapped in brown paper. I glanced at the back of his monitor and hoped my face showed nothing. He cleared his throat and hurried on. Any other questions? Is there an iron? A washing machine? It would do no harm for him to believe it was clothes storage I cared about. Oh, aye, he said. The washer and dryer are in with the massage chair and the mini-gym. His smile was broader than ever as, giving his thumb a lick that was just one notch too extravagant, he turned the top page of my application and bent his head to read it. 10 minutes later, I had myself a contract with the subcontractor to the Grampian Health Trust, doing the kind of specialised work we'd never got into at BG. And since I wasn't employed, and I'd coughed up a hefty deposit for the tracker logger, not to mention I was using my own van, there was nothing else needed. I patted myself on the back for my choice of company, big enough to go looking for serious sub-work, small enough to be panicking that they'd got it, green enough not to question me too much. Just one thing, doll, he said as we were heading out of the office to take a tour of the warehouse and meet the foreman. I'm Mr. Morton, not pal, okay? I flushed, but luckily he took it to be embarrassment instead of fury, and he swatted me on the behind with my own application in its folder as I passed through the door. I kept walking, teeth clenched and head high. I'd have put up with a lot worse than that to get my feet under the table and that locker filled. Of course, none of the shirts in any of the BG offices, much less the polos on the warehouse floor and behind the wheel, had ever messed with me. They looked. Sometimes they took their sweet, creepy time looking, and even sucked their teeth too. But they knew if a cardboard file ever hit Tash Dodd on the bum, there'd be a sacking and a punch in the gob to go with it. Nate Dewar wasn't going to be so lucky. Eyes on the prize, Tash, I told myself. Eyes on the prize. The foreman, an Indian man in his 50s, blinked once or twice when Morton introduced me, but he said nothing. "Own van," he said. "And she's going to be working on the meds," Morton said. "Got her DBS check and a refrigeration unit." "Good. Saves me a lot of juggling. Is it white, your van?" "Even better. We've got Klingons. You'll not mind Klingons, eh? Decals? Turn your wee van into our wee van. You don't need to keep it on when you're not logged in. We can't insist on it, but we prefer it, don't we, Jamie boy? Good advertising." "I've got a decal on my Beamer," Morton said, "unless herself's on board. She forgets where the money comes from." "Mine won't peg out for my work clothes," said the foreman. "Puts them in the dryer with a perfume sheet in case the neighbours see. Women. No offence, Natasha." "Natalie," I said, far too loud and far too bothered. Both of them stared at me for a moment, but then both of them concluded I was pissed off at them, making their wee jokes about wives. Nate, for short. "Nate, if you want me to answer." "You'll need to get used to a bit of joshing," said Morton, "and you'll need to answer to whatever." The two of them shared another look, and I made myself nod and try to look sorry. "Speaking of which," said the foreman, "come and say hiya to the dregs of the night shift. It's always the same few at the coups airs." He was talking louder and louder as he led the way into the bowels of the warehouse, past high cages of discarded packing plastic and towers of pallets ready for return. "No matter the routes, no matter the loads, these are the boys you'll find having one last wank in the bog before they put the rubber to the road. Aye, I mean you." This last was an answer to a shout of denial from somewhere deep in the avenues of loaded pallets. I snorted and fell into step behind him. The crudeness didn't bother me. I'd grown up on porny calendars and page 3 girls littering the vans and the loading docks. I'd heard more graphic accounts than that of what the drivers got up to on the lonely road and in the porta-cabin toilets before they set out. And anyway, despite everything, the smoky whiff of shredded cardboard from the recycling compactor, the oily perfume of the thick pallet wrap, and the nutty smell of biodegradable packing noodles felt like home. I was in. They didn't suspect a thing, and all I had to do now was keep my head down and shovel the days past me like a tunneling mole. I was going to get a month's dedicated experience in a new field. The perfect cover story for what I was up to if anyone from home found me. And I was going to write a statement to leave in a locker. Gary Dodd of BG Solutions, BG Connections and formerly BG Europe is the UK collaborator in the people smuggling operation uncovered at Calais on the 14th of June 2017. Attached find... Only I didn't know how to describe the papers I was going to stash here. Dockets, statements, memos, emails, invoices, delivery notes, driver's logs, clients' names. It was everything I had managed to copy in the long months of planning between the day of the late stomach bug and the burner phone, and the day in the pits of a filthy winter when I walked away. It was every piece of documentation I could lay my hands on, and that meant plenty. What with his commitment to belief in paper and ink. I had no idea what mattered and what didn't, because I'm not an accountant, never mind a forensic accountant, but somewhere, I told myself, sometime in some mammoth session of printing or copying, he must have produced at least one page that should never have seen the light of day. Could I have lied? Could I have pretended that I'd stashed evidence and then bet on my own bluff? Maybe, but it wasn't worth the risk. Also, I didn't trust myself not to chicken out. Real stuff, really stashed, was me throwing my cap up and over the wall. I still thought I was doing the right thing. Atonement, reparation, justice. I had so many names for it. At the same time, I told myself it was a project, a puzzle to be solved, a game to be played, and, if I was lucky, won. I didn't think about losing the game, or what the forfeit might be. 5. Ivy stepped off the train with bubbles of, well, she would have said trepidation if she was being honest, but excitement was a better word. Either way, she swallowed hard and drew a deep breath as she made her careful way along the platform to the footbridge. West Lothian, she said to herself, trying to make it sound romantic. Hadn't Walter Scott written about the Lothians? And wasn't there an ancient stone palace in one of the towns? Didn't earls and marquises live in castles dotted all over the county? Didn't people live in houseboats on the old Union Canal? But nothing she'd seen from the train windows was romantic in the least. She had seen cars, mostly, when the railway track ran alongside the M8, and she'd seen enough industrial storage to last a lifetime. Certainly no palatial grandeur, and nothing so quaint as a painted houseboat moored by a towpath. "A light here for Livingston East," a voice had said as the train was slowing. Livingston. Mother had had a friend there, and her scorn was always bottomless. "A glorified shopping centre," she said. "An overgrown car park. All roundabouts and carveries, not a high street in the place." Ivy had thought it sounded lovely, mistaking carveries for carnivals. Because of roundabouts, probably. She was sick of Fraserburgh High Street, where nothing ever changed. A glorified shopping centre sounded like fun, especially if it had a pictures upstairs, with 10 screens and plenty popcorn. Maybe we could go tonight, she thought, the 3 of us, watch a film, or maybe they would stay in at the fairytale cottage. She hadn't seen any cottages from the train window either. She'd seen bare fields and waste ground, the backs of factories and a guddle of sheds and shacks that could have been anything. Allotments, maybe. Lock-up garages for the people who lived in the high flats. Well, it's never the best of a place that backs onto the railway line, she told herself sternly. She was determined to have a lovely weekend, now she was finally here. It had taken so much more time than she'd expected to get it organised. Phone calls and texts, and an email with an attachment. That was because she didn't understand Kate's instructions. "Bring your photos," Kate had said. "I'm dying to see pictures of the rest of the family, and Gail wants to see what you looked like growing up, to compare." "I'll have to sort through the box," Ivy said. "Most of them aren't in albums, apart from my parents' wedding." "I didn't mean hump a load of old snaps." Kate sounded as if she was laughing, so Ivy said nothing. "Aren't they on the cloud by now? Scan them in, and we can see them when you get here." "I wouldn't know where to start," Ivy said. "I got myself in a mess trying to install something just last year there and had to pay a fortune in computer repair. Okay, well, not scanning then. Take a picture with your phone, email them to yourself, and then download them into a gallery. I don't use my phone for that sort of thing. I couldn't even follow what the fix-it lady was telling me. I had to give her my passwords and let her take over my account and do it herself. You shouldn't do that, Ivy, Kate said. Are you sure she was trustworthy? Of course. She told me straight out to change all my passwords once she'd finished. She made sure. Yes, but... Never mind, Kate said. I tell you what, have you got a buggy? A shopping trolley? I've got Mother's old one somewhere. Bring your photos and your laptop, and I'll scan them in for you while we're going through them. I'll make a montage for you. It can play on a loop. Won't that drain the battery? Ivy asked, but she did what Kate was suggesting, lifting down the familiar boxes, seeing again the familiar moments captured there in black and white, in faded Polaroid, and finally in colour. She had meant to go through and weed them out a bit. Gail and Kate wouldn't care about her dad's golf pals or her school trips to Balmoral. But, as ever, looking at all those smiling faces, the men in shirts and ties, the women in hats and gloves, made her feel a strange mixture of wistfulness for something she once had, and melancholy for something she never would have. She started trying to decide how old Mother was in all of these snaps, gauge where Mother had been in life at 54, the age Ivy was now. She had been married, with a teenaged child and a car, a whole house rather than a flat, a crowd of friends who came round in the afternoons to drink tea, a different crowd of friends who came round at night in couples to smoke and laugh and drink Gaelic coffee. Ivy could still remember rummaging in the after-eights box, the empty sachets like the gills of a black mushroom, and then her fingers hitting that one remaining chocolate. She would stand amongst the greasy plates and clouded glasses in the kitchen, nibbling it in quick, tiny bites, like a hamster stuffing its cheeks. And so, in the end, she ran out of time to sort the pictures and put names on the back. Instead, she just dusted all 3 boxes and slotted them into the wheeled tartan buggy she used to use for shopping until one day she had seen herself reflected in the scored plastic of a bus shelter and been shaken by the sight of an old woman. She had snatched the hood of her coat down and smoothed her hair, and she had tried to stand straighter and look like the girl she still thought she was. Only that stupid trolley, rumbling along behind her, made it a futile effort, and before she was halfway up her own street, she pulled the hood up again, clammy and unpleasant now on top of her wet hair in the drizzle. So she worried about arriving at Kate and Gail's house with it and the boxes of snaps. She wondered if they had theirs in stiff albums with little holders at the corners, like her father's boyhood stamp collection. She had even looked in the back aisle of the ironmonger's to see if there was a wicker trolley with a hooked handle like an old umbrella. She had a feeling, never examined, that wicker trolleys were smarter, that they went with cotton aprons and long Wellingtons with straps, instead of the PVC and short red rain boots Ivy wore, like Mother before her. But then she worried about arriving at the house at all. The fairytale cottage, supposedly, although the address seemed wrong. Did you say 1A Loch Road? She had asked, her biro poised over the pad, ready to write down whatever Kate told her. That's right, Kate had said. It's out of the station, down to the main street, turn right, and then first left. You shouldn't need to ask anyone, but there's plenty shops to bob into if you do get lost. A bookie and a nail bar that should both be open. And a Deems. Ivy had said nothing. She didn't understand why Kate and Gail weren't meeting her off the train. As for the suggestion that she'd go into a bookie's to ask for directions, she'd never been in one in her life. Somehow, the thought of the bookies bled into the idea of the nail bar and made that seem, in Ivy's imagination, just as disreputable, just as much a place she'd stay away from. And a Deems sounded like one of those nasty fly-by-night places, one step up from a market stall. She was determined to have nothing to do with any of it. It was a newsagent's, mind you, she saw as she walked past it minutes later. Small ads in the windows and hoardings propped up against the outside wall. But the pavement near the door was freckled with chewing gum and cigarette ends, and Ivy felt her mouth pursing as she moved to the edge of the pavement and trundled her shopping trolley past at a clip. So, this was Loch Road, opening between a shuttered Chinese takeaway and the nail bar Kate had mentioned. Ivy peered up it, telling herself nowhere looked its best in February, then felt her shoulders drop. Detached Edwardian villas. That was perfect. If she had ever thought where she'd like to find a long-lost sister, it would be in a quiet street of detached Edwardian stone villas. Here was solidity and respectability, but nothing so posh that Ivy would feel unequal to knocking on the front door. She knew this world. She'd had her nose pressed against it since she was a child, going to tennis parties, but never with her own racket, accepting invitations, but never repaying them. She set off up the street, telling herself to stop worrying. She'd been telling herself that all week, truth be told. All the fuss about the buggy and the boxes, the bookies and the house number were distractions. What really bothered her was that she had still, in the 2 weeks it had taken to organise this visit, not spoken to Gail. "She's thrilled," Kate said. "I mean, obviously, she was shocked at first, but she's absolutely delighted. She's just shy. She doesn't get about much. She's—" Kate dropped her voice here. "What people might call a recluse. And then there's still grief. It's not so long since our dear father passed. But she's absolutely dying to meet you. Don't worry." Ivy was beyond the end of the brick wall that marked the backyards of the main street shops. Now she was walking past a stretch of fancy railings, fleur-de-lis at the top, a yew hedge bulging behind them. Yew, not even plain old privet, and here was the gate, with 1A in gold on a medallion. Ivy stared. The house sat well back from the street at the far end of what was more an orchard than a garden. There was a path through the middle, made of very workaday concrete slabs and edged with bricks set diagonally so they stood up like shark teeth. But on either side there were apple trees she could tell were of great antiquity. They were gnarled and bowed, propped up with crutches here and there, looking like hunched-over crones, like enormous dead spiders, Ivy thought. Some of them so misshapen their trunks had split and showed thick orange fungus growing in the scars. The house itself, beyond the orchard, was just as startling. It was tiny and joined onto the side wall of the house next door. It had one deep bay window with a turret on top, one small bay window, and in between them a double door with black iron hinges and a stone surround. A carriage lamp above was lit and blearing orange out into the dull day. A fairytale cottage, Ivy thought, nodding. It was even in a sort of forest. Nearly. She looked for a doorbell or knocker. Finding neither, she rapped on the wood and waited, half turned away, half inclined to trot back down the path and catch the next train home. But when Kate opened the door, she was beaming, and she came right out onto the step and hugged Ivy tight. "You came!" "Of course I came. Did you wonder?" "I'm just being silly," Kate said. "Come in. Gail's having a nap, but that means you can look around and get settled before you meet her." Ivy was already looking around. Inside the front door was a small vestibule, and then, through an inner door, a broad, short passageway. The floor was polished stone, and the walls were panelled wood to head height, plain plaster above. On the left-hand side, a pair of glass doors were lying half open. Ivy left her trolley in the hallway and followed Kate through them. This room was the one with the big bay window. It also had a fireplace with a high marble mantelpiece and a picture painted right onto the wall above, framed with a plaster relief of fruit and ribbons. There was no furniture beyond a piano in the far corner. "This is the ballroom," Kate said. "Isn't it lovely?" Ivy was noticing the parquet floor under her feet, pungent with the sun beating in the window and drying it, and noticing, too, the pair of chandeliers over her head, clouded with dust. She nodded. "And through here is the supper room," said Kate, throwing back a pair of painted panel doors that disappeared into the wall. More parquet, better preserved on the shady side of the house, as well as another, smaller marble fireplace, and a little more furniture, a long table, or maybe it was a lot of little ones pushed together. But it stretched down the middle of the room with wheel-backed dining chairs neatly tucked under it. At one corner was a silver tray with a bottle of wine and 3 glasses on it. Ivy knew the bottle had only just been opened because she could hear it fizzing, and she thought she could see a vapour rising from its neck. Kate must have popped the cork when she heard the knock at the door. "Champagne," Kate said, pouring 3 glasses. She lifted one and held it out. So Ivy lifted another and clinked. "Welcome home," Kate said. "It's a very unusual house," Ivy said when she had taken a drink. She managed not to shudder, but it wasn't very nice wine. It tasted as if it had had an aspirin tablet dissolved in it. Beecham's, maybe. "Through there is the kitchen," Kate said, pointing. "Well, scullery. And across the hallway—" She went clip-clopping back through the 2 rooms, the sound of her high heels ringing out in the emptiness. Ivy thought she could hear the droplets on the chandeliers, setting up an answering tinkle as Kate passed underneath. Certainly some of the dust motes came showering down in the disturbance, swirling like snowflakes or fireflies against the light, until they fell below the level of the windowsill and passed into shade again. "The card room," said Kate, opening a door at the far side of the vestibule. This room was carpeted in rich red and panelled in wood so dark it was almost black. There were 3 green baize tables set up with chairs around them, and packs of cards and dice laid out as if a party was about to start. Against the back wall, a chaise, made up as a single bed, with a white counterpane and a nightdress case on the pillow, lent an odd note. "I use this room to sleep in," Kate said, "and the gentleman's cloakroom is just behind. It doesn't have a bath, of course, but it has a lavatory and a nice big basin. Lots of hooks for my clothes." "I see," said Ivy politely. "Gail has the ladies' withdrawing room," Kate said, going back out into the hall and opening another door farther along the passageway. "And the ladies' powder room adjoining." "Should we disturb her?" Ivy said. Then, "Oh, isn't this pretty?" The ladies' withdrawing room was painted blue and white, with a pale carpet and 2 more chaises, both made up as beds, with pillows in striped cases and wool blankets. One of them was untrammeled, but the other one had its covers pushed back as though someone had just climbed out. Ivy could see the neck and stopper of a hot water bottle amongst the covers. "Is that—" Ivy said, pointing to the neat chaise. "That's not for me, is it?" Surely the 2 sisters, the 2 lifelong sisters, would share this room, and she would have the single in the card room. Surely. "No," Kate said. "That's not your bed." There was a long silence while the echo faded. Kate had spoken very loudly. "Well, thank you for giving up your room," Ivy said at last. "The powder room through here really is pretty," Kate said, throwing open a frosted glass door. She was carrying on with the tour as though nothing had happened. Ivy followed her and peeked in. The room was quite large, although broken up by toilet cubicles set across the far end. Around the other walls, gilt-framed mirrors sat above little bandy-legged dressing tables with powder puffs in glass bowls and bottles of coloured liquid Ivy could only guess about. "It is," she agreed. "Has Gail got up and gone straight out?" "Oh, no," said Kate. "Sleeping or awake, she's downstairs." Ivy hadn't been aware of the knot in her shoulders until it loosened. "Ah," she said. "Have you got a flat down there?" Of course, they didn't really live in this— what would you even call it? A museum. They kept it as a showpiece and lived in a basement flat. But why would they be staying here tonight? Why would she? "Not really," Kate said. She hesitated. Haltingly, Ivy asked, "What is this?" "The house," said Kate. "You mean the house?" Ivy hadn't meant the house, but Kate sailed on. "It's on the feu as Doctor's Ballroom." That tickled our father. "We girls always called it our fairytale cottage, but really, it's an annex. The doctor's house, the old doctor's house, I should say, because he's been dead 100 years and none of our family have ever been doctors. But these things stick, don't they? Well, it's next door." Ivy's shoulders dropped away from her ears again. The big stretch of blank wall that this little fairytale cottage was joined onto was the real house where they actually lived. They just used this as an escape. Or maybe they'd always played here, from when they were girls together. "I'll go and bang on the floor for Gail," Kate said and left the room, almost trotting. Ivy looked around again. If the hospital hadn't made the mix-up, she would have spent her childhood playing here. She would be at ease here, at home. As if to make it come true, she wandered across to the tumbled chaise to straighten the blankets. As she flapped them, a little leather case that had been tucked into the folds dislodged itself and hit the hard floor, its gold clasp falling open. Ivy caught her breath and listened for rushing footsteps, but the house was silent. She bent to pick the case up, praying it wasn't broken. A drop of wine spilled out of her glass as she stooped. It was a double photograph frame, she saw, and it had survived the fall. In her relief, she forgot to worry about being caught snooping and opened it right up. On one side was a studio portrait of a couple in the stiff Sunday best of the 1950s. On the other side was a snap of 3 little girls. They were dressed for church, too, in white gloves and white shoes along with their summer frocks. One of them was Kate. It was obvious, even down all these years. So Ivy peered at the other 2, looking for her own childhood face in either of theirs. They looked vaguely similar to one another, but they looked nothing like her. Nothing at all. "How are cousins?" said Kate's voice suddenly behind her. Ivy snapped the photograph frame shut and put it down on the smoothed blanket. "Our favourite cousins, actually. They spent every summer here. Gail keeps those photographs of her loved ones with her always. Sleeps with them under her pillow, as you see. Our parents and me and our favourite cousins." Ivy didn't have any cousins, and no one had ever stayed a whole season when she was a child. She imagined herself here in the long, larky summers with Gail and their favourite cousins. Imagined Kate in her place, learning to tell Mother's mood from the sound of her breathing, springing mousetraps in the larder. "I thought you'd have a cat," she found herself saying, the memory putting the thought in her head. Kate frowned. "Because you're in the 9 Lives League. The branch down here, not the branch up by me." She was prattling. She always did when she was uneasy. But why was she uneasy? "I didn't tell you I was in the NLL," Kate said. "Didn't you?" Ivy said. "It doesn't matter." And it didn't. Nothing much seemed to matter, all of a sudden. She took another sip from the glass, and it didn't taste so bad this time. "Thank you," Kate said. "I'm nervous." But Ivy would have said, if anything, Kate had relaxed. "I want it to go well when you meet Gail, and I told you she was... I've been struggling with her lately, you see. I maybe should have told you more, been clearer, talked plainer." More plainly, Ivy thought. "Couldn't your auntie help?" she said. Somewhere else in the house, a door opened and closed, and Ivy couldn't say for sure whether the fixed look suddenly on Kate's face came as a result of that, or whether the blankness had already settled across her beforehand. She found herself thinking, just for a moment, that she could turn on her heel and make it to the front door before Kate in those court shoes could catch her. She could grab at the handle of her shopping trolley on the way, and if she missed it, she could live without a lot of old photos. The moment passed. "Don't be so daft," she told herself. "Why are you making trouble where there's no need? They're eccentric. So what? 9 out of 10 people looking at you would say you'd fit right in." Kate spoke again. "My auntie," she said. "Your Fraserburgh auntie," Ivy said. "Is she the mother of your favourite cousins?" "Yes, I did say I had an auntie, didn't I? In case you wondered what I was doing all the way up where you live. Fancy you remembering a little thing like that." Kate was smiling, grinning ear to ear, actually. "Here's to your excellent memory," she said, raising her glass. It was much fuller than Ivy's. It, after this last slug, was empty. Ivy could hear footsteps, soft and shuffling, moving through the house, coming closer. Once again she thought of the route to the front door, forgetting all about the shopping trolley this time. She thought of the length of the front path and the design of the catch holding the gate shut. She thought of the distance to the mouth of the street, to the nail bar and the newsagents. "Don't call her Gail," Kate said in a hissed whisper. "What?" Ivy's voice had dried to a croak. She cleared her throat. "Why not? In fact, don't talk to her." "What? Why?" Ivy wished she hadn't drunk the glassful now. She couldn't seem to catch the start of the thought she knew was nearby. "Unless she talks to you." The footsteps were right outside the door now. The handle was turning. "Come in, darling," Kate called as the door began to open. It was so quiet, Ivy could hear a clock ticking in the hallway. "Come and see who's here." Kate said, and it seemed that she spoke extra loud, ostentatiously loud. The clock stopped. "Is it her?" The voice from behind the door was no more than a breath. "Is she back?" "It's her, darling," Kate said. "She's back." "Who's back?" Ivy was asking as the door swung wide. Then she screamed.